Hollywood's lost addresses. 10 landmarks where careers were decided and myths were made, and what their disappearance reveals about the era. The map begins at the Ambassador Hotel and Coconut Grove, the Oscar ballroom whose glow survives only in newsreel frames. Ambassador Hotel and Coconut Grove, Wilshire Boulevard. On Wilshire Boulevard stood a hotel that set the industry's tone. Since 1921, its Coconut Grove was more than a nightclub, an unofficial negotiating hall where reputations could be made in one evening and careers with a single seat at the table. In the 1930s and early 1940s, the Academy Awards were handed out here. Heavy statuettes, hot lights, and next morning headlines turned the address into shorthand for luxury. After 1968, the ceremonial glow gave way to silence. The building hung between memory and abandonment, like a set no longer in the repertoire. When the walls came down piece by piece in 2005, more than a hotel vanished, a whole way of doing business did, from a time when an entire city could fit inside one room. Next turn, not a hotel but a self-contained world on camera dollies. MGM Backlot, a city behind a fence, more than 180 acres of streets, squares, and weather on demand. Kansas and the Emerald City were built here for the Wizard of Oz. Atlanta's winds turned for Gone with the Wind. Alleys vanished overnight and returned as Europe, the Midwest, or New York, whatever tomorrow's call sheet required. When the studio system weakened, magic turned into real estate. In 1970, the auction began. Facades dismantled, streets cut into lots, props sold for pennies, and condominiums rose where the sets had stood. Not only a landscape disappeared, a way of making movies did, when whole worlds rolled up to the camera on dollies. Backlots compressed continents into minutes. Sunrise on New York streets, lunch in Paris, dusk in Victorian London, all before wrap. False bricks hid lumber. Rain arrived from rigs. Seasons flipped with paint. When those acres vanished, speed vanished too. The nimble grammar of illusion, replaced by permits, traffic, and budgets. From make-believe streets to a dining room where deals were inked and a salad got its name, the Brown Derby. A restaurant shaped like a hat became Hollywood's billboard, but it was the dining room on Vine Street, steps from Hollywood Boulevard, that turned the Derby into a trading floor of reputations. Deals were inked at the table, while columnists Louella Parsons and Hedda could spin an evening's whisper into tomorrow's headline. The rule was simple. Sit near the right person tonight, appear in the right frame tomorrow. In the late 1930s, the Cobb Salad was born. Robert Cobb's improvisation that became the house signature. Fashion shifted. The hat came down earlier, and the Vine Street location closed in 1985. What survived were replicas and photo archives, a reminder of how loud, quiet arrangements used to look. Where did the myth-makers actually live? Garden of Allah. The mansion of Alla Nazimova, later a bungalow hotel in 1927, became an address people sought for night talks and morning paragraphs. Scott Fitzgerald, Dorothy Parker, and Robert Benchley lingered there. Humphrey Bogart and Errol Flynn dropped in. It worked like a bohemian state of mind, courtyard hush, lamplight, manuscripts still smelling of edits. Rooms doubled as offices, whispers turned into punchlines, plot points, and pages. Neighbors borrowed lines, not sugar, and deadlines arrived at dawn, a temporary city of sentences, improvised and lived in, restless. In 1959, the island vanished from the map. A bank rose in its place. What endured were the stories and the names, still louder than brick. From intimate conversations to a cathedral of streamlined modern, Pacific Auditorium. Streamlined waves of facade and 4 teal pylons made this building a visual anthem of Los Angeles. From 1935, its vast roof sheltered exhibitions, premieres, and civic celebrations. In the 1940s, even Academy Awards-level events. The panoramic hall functioned like a cathedral for public life, a place to see and be seen. By century's end, the legend burned out literally. A 1989 fire erased the structure. What remains is an homage facade at Disney California Adventure and the memory of how architecture could gather a city under one roof. War shifts priorities. Next stop, Hollywood Canteen. In 1942, a door opened on Cahuenga, where Hollywood stepped out of character and into service. Bette Davis and John Garfield greeted servicemen at the entrance. Marlene Dietrich might be behind the counter, Rita Hayworth on the dance floor, James Cagney in a spur-of-the-moment turn. Music, hot meals, a packed floor, all free. The price was time and attention. 2 years later, Warner Brothers sealed the legend with Hollywood Canteen, 1944. After victory, the need faded. The club closed in 1946, and the building was later torn down. What remains are newsreels, posters, and the memory of a place where fame wore a volunteer's badge. From the dance floor to a temple of the airwaves at Sunset and Vine, NBC Radio City. In 1938, a palace of the West Coast airwaves opened at Sunset and Vine, Hollywood's Radio City. Voices of Jack Benny, Bob Hope, and Bing Crosby filled the stage. Applause landed live, turning the intersection into the coordinates of a national evening. When television became the home's main window, the studios emptied. By the early 1970s, the operations were gone and the building was dismantled. What remains are tapes and photographs, the era's voice still cued by reels that can summon that laughter and that rhythm. Next, another address where radio made Hollywood talk, Warner Brothers Hollywood Radio Studios. In the early 1930s, Warner Brothers built a hub for live shows and promotional recordings that made Hollywood talk in living rooms. Jack Benny and George Burns drew applause in real time. Scenes from Little Caesar and The Public Enemy were refashioned as radio dramas with orchestra and Foley, the advertising vanguard of an era when a film began long before the screen. By the late 1950s, the center of gravity shifted to television. Traffic thinned, the rooms went dark, and the structure was eventually torn down. What endures are the audio archives and a national habit of walking into movies along routes first heard on the radio. From studios to haute dining, Perino's. Opened in 1932 and moved in 1950 into a Paul Revere Williams building, Perino's held the high line as firmly as its guests held the perfectly timed pause. Frank Sinatra, Elizabeth Taylor, Lucille Ball dined here. The finely tuned, mid-century modern room doubled as a stage for manners, wardrobes, and hints. Deals were arranged at tables, but the point was status. If your evening happened at Perino's, elegant Hollywood still existed. Tastes shifted faster than prefix. In 1986, the restaurant closed. In the 1990s, the building was torn down. Perino's outlasted the studio system, but not the city's new aesthetic, shorter rituals, and an address that no longer guaranteed an event. From fine dining to a humbler shape with a louder legend, Schwab's Pharmacy. Half drugstore, half legend. The corner at Sunset and Crescent Heights moved to the rhythm of studio call sheets, soda at the counter by day, tables at night where a whisper could harden into news. Judy Garland, Orson Welles, F. Scott Fitzgerald passed through. It drew people who settled things between a coffee and a phone call. The headline tale is the Lana Turner myth, discovered at the counter. Historians argue the details, but the story fused to the address tighter than brick to facade. After a long prime in the 1930s, the pharmacy closed in 1983 and later disappeared physically. What remains is a memory map, an ordinary corner where deals and rumors became part of Hollywood's autobiography. Final stroke. One map of loss. What a city gives up when addresses disappear. This isn't a plea for nostalgia. When an address disappears, it isn't the walls that vanish. It's the roots. The habit of turning toward a soda counter, the hush of a bungalow where pages were marked up, the cathedral roof of big nights. The radio stages that gathered live laughter, the backlot streets that rolled up to the camera on rails. The industry sheds its skin and forgets the mechanics of its own magic. How agreements took shape, where rumors were born, why those halls, lines, and crossroads existed. What remains is a stubborn layer. Films and newsreels, audio reels and city legends, replica facades, and dishes named for places. The map isn't empty, it's stamped with habits, an era once walked by. Each lost name reminds us, A city outlasts memory longer than people do, but it still needs addresses to remember how the wonder was made.